Hello and welcome to All Generations. Today I will be talking about the different names and nicknames which have been used for the generation following millennials, most commonly known as Generation Z or Gen Z. And there are quite a few. I'm going to be going over 20, including how some of them came about. Some of the names are kind of random, but I also found some common themes which you'll see. I am curious what you think about some of these names, so comment below your favorite or your least favorite. So here we go. I'm starting with the Homelanders / the Homeland Generation. Just in case you haven't heard me mention it somewhere else, William Howe and Neil Strauss co-authored some books on generations together, and they also have their own theory on generations. In 2006, Strauss and Howe held an online contest to figure out a name for the next generation, and the Homeland Generation was the winner. This is the name that they still use, or Howe still uses, as Strauss has since passed, but really anyone who considers their theory a be-all end-all for generations. That is why I decided to start with this one. So why was the Homelanders even an option? What does the term Homeland have to do with this generation? In 2002, Congress passed the Homeland Security Act, and the Department of Homeland Security opened its doors in 2003. The catalyst for its creation was 9/11. After 9/11 and the War on Terror, many perceived the homeland as less safe. So Generation Z is, coming about in this time where there's a threat of terrorism and some people are on edge. An additional idea that kind of reinforces the name is the idea that this generation is kept at home more than past generations. This can be due to protective parenting or technology or whatever. The next name is the Founders. In 2015, MTV surveyed 1,000 13 and 14-year-olds to figure out what they wanted to be called. And the most popular choice was the Founders. So what does that even mean? I read a New Yorker article that said when these young people are calling themselves the Founders, they are associating themselves with the West Coast startup culture, which, okay, if that is what it is, sure. Some people are saying that Generation Z is more entrepreneurial. They also said that about millennials. Another thing I've seen thrown out is that they call themselves the Founders because they feel the need to create a new social order elsewhere, and I feel like this was actually on the original site, but I can't find that article anymore from MTV, that it said the concept was based on the idea of this generation fixing what millennials disrupted. Now, this kind of still goes along with the idea of creating a new social order, but it's a little different. If these are the intentions, honestly, I think it's a horrible idea. Negative sentiments towards a past generation being the foundation of a new generation is just not a good idea. And millennials already get enough hate. Other top choices from the survey included the Bridgers, possibly bridging the gap between the old and the new. Regenerators, I guess regenerating the world. Navigators, and I think it's navigating the world for older people, which I thought kind of funny. And one I'll go over next. I think it is nice that MTV chose to survey members of the actual generation, though a small subset of them. But I think the outcome was meh. Also, at this point, some of them still are on the young side, and so if we suddenly were wanting to go a more creative naming route, I think we could wait a little bit. So the next one is the Builders. This is another one from that survey, but I've also seen it mentioned elsewhere, which is why I'm bringing it up. A design and innovation consultancy in Portland, Oregon uses the Builders as a nickname. It's called Ziba, and the basic idea is the same as the Founders as well, that they want to, fix what's wrong and build something new and so on. So the next names I'll be discussing kind of have a theme to them. In this section, there will be a couple others. And one of the themes I saw with some of the names was tech. Not really surprising, a lot of people associate technology with the younger generations. So the next 6 or so plus are going to be associated with technology. The first one is Linksters. Now I thought this one would be about LinkedIn when I saw it, but actually it's just about being linked to technology. Speaker and author Megan Johnson came up with the term, saying this generation is the first generation to be linked to technology from day one. She notes that millennials can remember a time of dial-up and before social media, and that differentiates them from Gen Z. The name is in the title of her 2010 book, From Boomers to Linksters, Managing the Friction Between Generations at Work. It's been used here and there since then, but isn't super popular today. Next is Generation Mobile, or Mobile. A Canadian author named Don Tapscott, who has written on the generations, likes the name Generation Mobile. He said the boomers would come home and watch TV, and then Gen Y would come home and turn on the computer, and that the next generation, they come home and they don't turn on anything because they're already connected, such as through their mobile phone, and so they are on their mobile, while they're mobile, wherever they go. It's kind of the idea. They also do a lot of things via mobile. Wi-Fi is more common, the mobile networks are more spread out, and so on. Just allows people to be more connected. The next one is Gen We, like the game console. So the chief marketing and innovation officer at Taco Bell, Brian Nichol, at least back when this was said in 2013, thought this was a good name because this generation makes a game out of everything, or at least that was the idea. Now we have what is not exactly a name or nickname, but is a descriptive term, and I thought it was still worth mentioning. That is digital native. It was first applied to millennials, but is used to talk about Gen Z too, and kind of anyone after that as well. Digital native is a name for someone who has grown up during the digital age. That is in contrast to digital immigrant, who learned digital things as an adult. It's generally used to refer to anyone born after 1980. So millennials on. Next is Screenagers, which has also been applied to Generation Alpha. There was a 2010 documentary made by a physician and parent who was facing the dilemma, should they give their teenage daughter an iPhone? I think the implications are kind of obvious. The next one is sort of similar. It is Screeners. Paul Taylor of Pew Research Center appeared on Jon Stewart's The Daily Show in 2014 to discuss his new book at the time. And after that interview, Pew received some name suggestions from viewers. One of these was Screeners. The person who suggested it said, "My students live and die by the screen." I'm assuming they were a teacher. I also found what appeared to be an unpublished academic paper, which mentioned the term as well. It was actually in the title of the paper. The authors of it basically said that Gen Z, such as screeners, will always observe life through screens, usually 4 or 5 at a time, and that they have access to more viewing screens than any past generation, which probably true, yeah. Not that important, but it was just another instance of it, so I thought I'd mention it. And now I'm going to run through some of the other suggestions from viewers after that show, not super widely used or anything, but just thought I'd mention them while we're at the subject. They are Twennials, Twennials. Kind of a fun one, if you can pronounce it. The reasoning is we are the tweens of the century after all, or something like that. Okay. The next one, @generation / the swipe generation, the symbol. The reasoning, thought of it while I was watching my son use his iPad. I do wonder if we will ever have a generation with a symbol in it. 2Ks. Reasoning, since they are born after 2000. The conflict generation. The reason given was because many of them have grown up during multiple Middle East wars. And last of these, someone suggested iGen / iGeneration, or even iGeners. That person noted that they are not a journalist, but actually these terms have been used before, or they are used sometimes. A professor of psychology at San Diego State University named Jean Twenge, and she's now a little bit known in this field, has written about the generations and called, or you could say named, from her perspective, the generation iGeneration. She wrote a book called Generation Me, which was supposed to be about millennials, and later came out with a book called iGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, and what that means for the rest of us. Now, writers have named generations in the past, but so far, just not working with Gen Z. Now, the I can mean internet, iPhone, iPad, iPod, etc. Now, the next theme I kind of saw with the naming was a sort of nod to diversity and change in the generation. So the next theme I'm going to cover fall into that theme in some way. First, the trans generation. I saw this one in a Huffington Post article, and so you might be thinking transgender, transsexual, and you would be partially right. Aside from transgender and transsexual, the article uses other words with trans in it as well, though, including transracial, transglobal, and transeconomical. Another less common nickname for this generation is the rainbow generation. This is partly in reference to the racial and cultural diversity of the generation. The spread of same-sex marriage and the election of the first Black president in the US are also said to have played a role in the choice of name. I also just wanted to mention there is a spiritual community which believes that some children are born psychic, and this is one of the names they use. The next one is plurals or pluralist generation. The reasoning behind this one is a generation is coming of age in a pluralistic society. I know many of you are probably thinking, what does that even mean? A pluralistic society is one where you have different people with different views, like different religious views, different cultural background, and so on. So basically diversity, and people tolerate these differences. So with Gen Z being a more diverse generation in some ways, that's kind of where it's coming from in that perspective. Generation Z is the most diverse generation in the US now, aside from possibly the one coming after it, but they're not all born yet. So they are just barely over half non-Hispanic white, so they may be the last with that majority in the country. Coming of age at this time, and that's partly due to technology as well, pluralists / Gen Zs have access to a variety of different viewpoints and perspectives, and they also tend to be open-minded. And so that's why it's a kind of fitting name in a way. The last one in this section is Generation Edge / Edgers. A consulting company called Bridgeworks wrote an article in 2017 where they called them Gen Edge. The article says there are two reasons. One, they are growing up on a cultural edge, being the last generation with a white, non-Hispanic majority in the US, as I just mentioned. And two, Bridgeworks says this generation is growing up with an edge from constant streams of violence and firsthand news from social media, and as a result of living under the same roof as their Gen X parents. Now, I am moving on to the next category I kind of saw. There are a few names and nicknames which basically compare themselves to a past generation or are in relation to a previous generation. The first one is Post-millennials. It wasn't exactly a name for them, but more of an initial placeholder, but was, for that time, was kind of used like a name. Pew Research Center used this term to refer to them and first in-depth look at them back in 2016. I think this was kind of a good idea because they were saying, okay, we're ready to look into this generation, but we don't want to name them yet. This is just what we're going to call them while a name is figured out, instead of also just trying to make up a name for them too. Another nickname for Generation Z is Millennials on Steroids. And this is actually a relatively popular one. We do see a lot of the same trends we saw with Millennials, but to an even more extreme in some cases with Gen Z. So in that sense, it makes a little bit of sense. This can range from their experiences with technology to their opinions on things, behaviors, and so on. Of course, this name has actually also been used as a nickname for Gen Alpha, which is the generation after Gen Z. The next one comes from a site called Millennial Marketing and is in contrast to the previous one. They say, while their research shows some similarities to millennials, they think that their personal beliefs and value systems are more similar to Gen Xers and baby boomers, and that is why they call them the pivotal generation. They do say this generation doesn't have all the same attitudes as those generations though, and they do have their own approach. So again, pivotal. Zoomer, which when I type it in, it often wants to autocorrect to doomer. Kind of funny, I guess. Merriam-Webster has Zoomer in the words we're watching category. The entry says, Its use is particularly popular as a contrast to baby boomer or boomer, but before Gen Z was established, Zoomer was used to refer to especially active baby boomers. It says other things too, but I thought that was the important part. It's been used at least since 2016, and people do still use it sometimes. So now we've related Gen Z to millennials, Gen Xers, and even boomers. So now we have to relate them to the generation before that too. Do you know what that is? It is the silent generation. This is actually a pretty popular one. Generation Z is sometimes called the new silent generation. It's sort of a popular one. I honestly feel like I could do an entire video just discussing the truth and not so much to this name. I'm not going to delve too deep, but basically some of the things they have in common are, one thing they have in common is sort of growing up during war and difficult economic times, and some of the traits they're said to have, like being pragmatic, but also the idea that they will grow into wealth and prosperity as the silents did. Also, for both, the world can seem like kind of a risky place. Next, I have some that have been used on Generation Z, but have also been used on past generations because sometimes people just keep trying the same names on every generation. Now, when I'm saying a name has been used, I mean it could have been used in, news articles, research articles, on a marketing agency website, and so on. And that applies to everything so far and after this. So one of the names that has been used on past generations and this generation, or some variation of it, is me-gen. In the past, and even still today, me-generation is used as a nickname for baby boomers, while Generation Me is used for millennials. And sometimes they use one of them on Gen Z too. Not as often though. Yet. The next one is the Selfie Generation. I'm going to go a tad more into this one. I'm curious which generation you think is a better fit for it. So I need to provide a little bit of context. So I am in fact a millennial, and when I was growing up and even when I was in high school, I don't really remember selfies being a thing. So it is kind of funny, I thought, that millennials are often called the selfie generation. They happened, maybe, sometimes, but it wasn't really until I was in college or even grad school that I really remember it blowing up. Generation Z is really growing up more so with this idea from the start. So I'd say that's 1 point for Gen Z. Now, selfies are not totally new. One of the first ever photos of a human back in the 1800s was a selfie, basically. People have always done them sometimes, but they weren't so common. I think smartphones, which can take photos, as well as the move from film to digital photography, is really responsible partly for this, for the rise of selfies. Anyway, I've tried taking selfies with film cameras a couple times, and it's kind of hard if you actually want to do it like this because you can't focus it. So anyway, I was looking up when selfies started or kind of became big, and I found a Guardian article, and I'm going to quote it. Oxford Dictionaries reveals it being selfie, was first used online by a young drunk in 2002 to describe a self-portrait photograph. Also, the guy is Australian, not that that matters, and I bet he did not expect it to blow up like that. Well, when something starts, it can take a little while to gain traction. So it was in 2013, and that seems about right to me, that selfie became Oxford Dictionary's word of the year. And that meant it was probably being used for a little bit leading up to that point, pretty popularly, but that was when they decided that's the word of the year. Of course, keep in mind that, that's going to have a little bit more of a British perspective, but the Guardian article also said that is really when it gained momentum in the English-speaking world. So a few Gen Zers might have experienced the first year of high school without it, but after that, the idea of selfies was pretty popular. But Gen Z has not only been called the selfie generation, but also the not-so-selfie generation. It's a thing that members of this generation will sometimes have 2 Instagrams, real Instagram and a thin Finstagram, with the F standing for fake Instagram. It seems that the Finstagram is where they actually put their authentic and real photos, where the real Instagram is where they put the more staged parts of their life. Don't ask me. So what do you think? Which one is more of the selfie generation? Though maybe, who knows, maybe opinions will change as they get older as well. There are a couple more terms that have been used as well in past generations. I'll just mention them now because I don't have too much to say about them. They are Generation Reality TV, Posts, and Generation Tech. And now I have just a few more names / nicknames for Generation Z that don't fit well into the other categories. I know, so many. First is T-People / Neo-generalists. Tim Brown, the CEO of global design company IDEO, is the one who came up with the site. Brown mentions them together as sort of synonymous terms-ish. He describes neo-generalists and T-people as those who are both specialists and generalists. T-shaped refers to the idea of going broad and deep. Brown's idea is that they might have a more multidisciplinary approach to work. Next is TrueGen. McKinsey & Company, a management consultancy company which does some generational research, calls Gen Z TrueGen. They also call them Gen Z, but they call them TrueGen because the generation searches for the truth and they value authenticity. And they believe their search for truth is their motivation for consumption. Next we have Centennials because, millennials was taken. A centennial means the 100th anniversary, and it's used because some of this generation was born around the turn of the century. They were also born around the turn of the new millennium, so millennials could have worked for them, but it also still works for millennials as millennials come of age during that time, and some grow up during that time. So the generation we currently know as Gen Z or Generation Z is still pretty new, and that's why even in recent years people use a variety of different names and nicknames for them. So you may be wondering, with all of these different names, why am I calling them Generation Z? In 2019, Pew Research Center checked some of the names that have been used in Google Trends, and they found that Gen Z was really outpacing the other name options. I checked recently and found it to still be very true. It's simply the name that is being used the most. That's it for this video, but subscribe to see more content on the generations. Give the video a thumbs up, and if you have any thoughts, comment below. See you next time.